like picking the partners and picking the kind of people that we want in our lives. And if we want to make sure that the kind of people that we're picking are quality people, we have to be quality people. We have to be willing to be authentic and brave and hear those rejections and not make it mean anything about us and not make it mean that we're not whole, worthy, and lovable, but just like, you know what? Not everybody's going to like me. Not everybody's going to have the same values as me.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast Biz on the Brain with your host, Annemarie, where we talk about how to be your most unapologetic and authentic self in life and business because you deserve the best queen, you are worthy, and when you let your freak flag fly, you attract the right kind of people, the right kind of weird into your life, and then you thrive. Is that a thing? That sounded so nice and sounded so nice and rhymey. Oh, I gotta love it. I need to write it down. Anyway, this is a space where I want to talk with the coolest women or just really inspiring female entrepreneurs about their life, how they see intuition, how they work in their business, what led them to do that, how they change the world a little bit at a time. And this topic specifically in this episode is all around relationship to self and by extension, relationship to other people, be it romantic or platonic. It really is a trickle-down effect. If you don't like yourself, then you accept much less than you actually deserve, then you might override your needs and you might settle for things, and that makes nobody in a relationship happy. If you're only showing up halfway and they're not even getting to see you, then they might be let down by the realization of it. Then that might feel like rejection, but you never showed up as yourself, so it might be a self-protecting mechanism. There's a whole lot of complexity to relationships, but what you can only do and should do, because you should honor yourself and show yourself a self-compassion, is to start with yourself and be in the best relationship with yourself so you can show up in a good relationship with other people, and then both people can grow together and be in a thriving relationship, working on yourself, working on each other, and just being the best versions and changing together and working on your triggers and all of the good stuff. So this episode is, full of all of the beauty of the ups and downs and talking about what goes into having healthy relationships with the wonderful Maria Levin, who is a relationship coach. Without further ado, let her introduce herself and listen to the podcast episode. Hello. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm so happy and excited to have you here. And if you can tell, I actually matched my wardrobe today to your background because for those who can't see it, she has the loveliest background with like a cloth full of beautiful flowers in the moonlight, and it's so gorgeous. So hello and thank you for being here, Maria.
Thank you so much for having me. You look lovely, by the way.
Thank you. And do you want to quickly introduce yourself in your own words? What do you do and what makes you so cool? And I can't wait for people to hear it.
Sure. So I'm a women's romantic relationship coach. And so I help women who are in relationships who are feeling stuck. They're feeling like they're not really happy or like their relationship could be more. And I help them give them the tools to create that relationship that they really want to be in. So I think a lot of us think that we have to either settle for like a subpar relationship sometimes, or we have to like try to find a different partner. And I offer a different alternative. I offer the tools to actually create the kind of relationship you want to be in by controlling what you can control. And we have more influence over our relationships than we think we do. So I show women how to do that.
I love it. And it's especially because you actually teach about relationships, but in a way that is focused on yourself, because so much in media and the way we are being raised, especially as women, is about the other person. You need to find somebody that you kind of like, and then you need to make yourself pleasant enough or like amenable enough for them to like you back. You have this weird dancing with the dating and the weird rules and all of the things, and you slowly show yourself, don't scare them off, settle for somebody, and then they might not actually like all of you, which is fine. But if they already realize maybe they actually didn't like you to begin with, and they're not happy with who you are, but you present yourself as that, then also maybe you don't actually like yourself in that way. Because how unrewarding is it to be with somebody that you thought you knew, and then suddenly they're a different person, and then you're just being almost catfished into this relationship because you just had, or you even projected a potential on them that you fell in love with and that you then dated, and then they never had an intention to be that potential, live up to it, because that's a you thing, it's not a them thing. Right? So like there's all of these weird narratives around just compromising and actually settling for other people instead of just actually looking at them how they are right now. Do you like that? And looking at you how you are right now. Do they like it? Is it a match? Yes or no? There's like not really that much gray space at the end of the day. If you just like yourself, they should like themselves, and then you can be better together. But you shouldn't set out to change them or change yourself for them. I think that is a very treacherous ground to walk on, but it's so common and it's so often also given as advice. Thoughts?
No, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that it's also something that we feel almost like subconsciously, like we have this rooted belief that we're not good enough in some capacity, or maybe we're too much. And so we're like, okay, I know this about myself, right? I assume this, I believe that strongly. So I'm going to approach this person in a way that's going to kind of like preempt their thoughts about me. So I'm going to hide this part of me, or I'm going to like not lie, but maybe, just not
Question.
mention it. Yeah, exactly. And then they like, oh, they fell in love with a version of us. And then we can't sustain that for long. So over time we start to really reveal who we are. And then they're like, oh, I didn't know that about you. And so we have to start off from a really authentic, honest, loving place for ourselves primarily. And then the people that really love us are going to come to us the same way we work in our business, right? It's like if we don't show up fully as who we are, then our ideal clients are never going to come to us. And so that's the way that I approach when I work with people on the relationship. It's like, who do you love you? First and foremost, let's start there. Do you have the confidence to show up in your relationship as who you actually are? To ask for the things that you actually want to ask for? Because we do need to stand up. We do need to be our own advocate. And if you don't know what those things are, and if you don't know that you deserve them, then you're never going to be willing to ask for them, stand up for them, and demand them. So we do a lot of work around that first and foremost.
I love that because it is such a central issue that you know who you are. And a lot of people, like speaking from experience, my own, that sometimes don't actually know really who am I, because there's so many things that I've been told over the years that I just assimilated and accepted. And when you are in this process of unlearning things, question, how you've been, or like what still serves you and what doesn't, you start to unravel layers upon layers, and you sometimes like surprised to like meet some part of yourself. Oh, I didn't know that. Like maybe I buried that, or maybe I forgot that from my childhood because people didn't validate me or tried to shift focus away from things. So I felt like I had to hide it, and so many people have had that at some point, because especially with the schooling system, they will push you in boxes. They will like limit your expression to fit in with the schedule and with the way that the teachers want to work with you, right? And then the same in business, especially if you're employed, you have to function a certain way. You have to represent a certain way because you're an extension of the business. And then you have to limit your self-expression. And so often people just categorize themselves and shift themselves into different versions depending on who they are interacting with. Like I once read this article about, like in psychology, there's this thing where you are like basically up to 10 different people in a way that is more like an expression of how you present parts of yourself to different people. So it's different with your parents, you're a little bit different with your close friends, different than to your employee, an employer. And like, so you're like different faces, like you just censor parts of yourself for different environments. And it makes sense in society, it's not always acceptable, just like codes of conduct and certain ways that are appropriate more in other contexts. And that kind of makes sense. But especially if you're just catering to other people, are like a people pleaser, that is really, really bad for your self-esteem, and it will trickle down into every aspect of your life. So I really like that. Yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I was just so excited to say that. I think part of what I love about being in like a thriving relationship is that sense of absolute acceptance by another person. If you can get to that place where you fully accept who they are and they fully accept who you are, like that feeling is a feeling that can be so rare to a lot of people because they're often told that they're wrong in one capacity or another. And so when we can find someone that we're like, I am fully myself with you and you love every aspect of me, even the ones that are not so great, like that is so like life affirming.
right? But it feels so almost utopian, like and it doesn't mean that you like every aspect of them, but you accept them as a whole human being, flaws and all, right? Because so many times there's something that bugs you about your partner, but it doesn't mean that you just want to like completely change that part of them, or you just want to ditch them. If I don't know, like some people are just absolutely great for you, and you just love them despite the things that maybe tick you a little bit off, or that maybe that they don't like, but overall you wouldn't want to change them, right? And it's so difficult because we often criticize that in ourselves. We always get told like you can change for other people, but at the end of the day they have to change out of their own will. You can't force somebody to change. They might just be performing, or actually they might feel like you're not accepting them, which will build resentment if you don't communicate. And those skills are so hard to combine and not really taught. And they feel really triggering. And what I've learned about relationships instead, it's actually like you often pick, something that you kind of missed in your childhood and something that reflects your childhood, your parents. Even if you say, like, I never want to be like my parents, and I never want to have that kind of partner, your subconscious, because it's familiar and that's what you've been like mirrored, will pick something in that line until you're very mindful of it. But it's also a good way to practice being triggered and to heal those wounds if you are in a safe space where you can actually be yourself, where you can actually work through that together, like both parties, right? So you will trigger each other at some point, but it's knowing that you have somebody who will not just abandon you, just like straight up leave you because you showed that vulnerability, but they would be there to help you. Maybe they have to calm themselves down, maybe you have your own little strategies, but they will be willing to work on the relationship with you. That is so nourishing. That feels like, like a safe space with a person. That's that kind of peace that I'm hearing so often about. Like relationships shouldn't be like all dramatic and tumultuous. It should feel like peace, like so loving at the core of it. Like some people think that's very boring, but it actually can be exactly because it is so unfamiliar that it feels so boring because, yeah, it is a different territory of just existing nicely and peacefully.
Oh, yeah. And I experienced that firsthand. I remember when I was first transitioning to my healthy relationship that I'm currently in with my partner, I was like, this is weird. Like, why is this so calm? I think maybe we don't have the sparks. I remember thinking that, like, maybe it's not as passionate as my old relationship. I was definitely doing a lot of comparison and thinking, like, why isn't this like the ups and downs that I'm so used to? And also kind of like waiting for the shoe to drop at any given moment. Like, oh, he's going to lie to me about something. He's going to do something to disappoint me. I just know it. And then he never did. And I'm like, what the hell? This is insane. And I felt myself wanting to sabotage the relationship because I was so used to those old patterns of like toxicity. It was crazy. And I'm so glad that I did the work to push through it and understand it because intellectually I knew that this person that I was with was somebody worth being with. Like I could see it and I knew how different he was. And yet part of me was like, something's wrong.
Yeah, no, that's very common, I think. And there's actually, I don't know if you know about it, but like the bestest series in the entire world is Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. And that is one of the main topics. You know it? Oh my gosh, yes. Everybody should watch it. I feel like it should be mandatory in school. Maybe at like the last year, because it's not always very appropriate, but it's like amazing. And it tackles that one issue, especially being brainwashed into settling. There's literally a song. I won an Emmy for it. And then just being okay with it being boring, so to say, because peace and like functional, healthy relationships are not about the drama, not necessarily. You need to be able to have an argument, but still feel like not accepted. So like feel heard in that way. And it's just hard, I feel like, especially if you have not seen that too much in your real life, like mirrored by friends and family, to then actually accept that. And for the longest time, like when I started the path on like working on myself, like going to therapy and being much more mindful, which feels isolating at some point because you're like merging into this new persona, and a lot of people hold on to the old version that you're trying to like, let it die off. Just like merge from, I don't know what you want to call it, metamorphosis. But I always had like that belief where I'm like, I need to like be healed to some extent before I can even open myself up to letting all of that baggage with me into a new relationship, or like unloading it at somebody because I want to be transparent up front, but don't want emotional dump. So I was like talking to a friend that was like, yeah, I can't just date because I have all of this stuff. And she's like, no, you should still date. And that actually helps you heal the stuff. But like, it shouldn't be like, the point of dating to like heal the stuff. But it shouldn't be, you shouldn't see yourself as like just broken thing that needs to be fixed to be worthy of dating and being loved. And I was like, mind blown. Right? Like, that is just such, I don't know, I'm still working on that in my head.
No, absolutely. I love that she said that to you because, well, first, we're never going to be done, right? We're always
No.
in progress. There are always things that we can improve. And so if you're like, well, I need to wait until I get to this perfect point, you're always going to be waiting because you're always going to be a human being. But then to say, like, if you hold that belief that, like, I'm broken in some capacity, I think that we've all held that belief at different points in our lives, then that's the belief that's gonna hold you back. And that belief is gonna bleed into the relationship, and that's really the belief that would need to change in order for you to be willing to go into the relationships and to be willing to explore that. And so for you to recognize that you had that belief and kind of go, wait a minute, I don't think this is really serving me. I think that's what really did the trick for you to go, okay, maybe I'm not actually broken. Maybe I'm exactly who I need to be to enter into these relationships. And then you can approach yourself from a place of love, and then other people will love you too because they see that inside of you. The people that are right, that are worth it, that are willing to give you that healthy attention and love, because that's what you're going to attract.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you should go for. And it's just like the other day, I also talked to someone who went like, she on like 100 dates or something. I don't know if that was literal, but she was like a lot. And her goal was that I will show up every single time as me, all the time, full on just me. And she repelled like most of them. They were all just like, well, like, can you change this and that? Just like, no. And then she actually found one that was like, I like that. Like, I just like you. And she's like, really, like all of me. And she's like, and he's like, yeah, yeah. And now they've in a happy relationship because she was like not settling. She didn't want to waste her time on just, I don't know, rebound relationship of sorts. Because so many people just want companionship, really, or they just want to have, like, to avoid some stigma of society that pushes you into a relationship. Why don't you have kids? Why are you not dating? Why aren't you not married yet? And like all of these these stone markers in your life that people are just so quick to talk about. It's almost like that's a normal topic of small talk, and it feels super insensitive. I don't understand how that is just normal to just ask someone straight up, like, why aren't you married yet? Why aren't you pushing out babies? It's just so indiscreet. But people think it's totally normal, and then they get shocked when you're not. It might also be triggering to them because they thought it must be, and then they were settling for other people, but like that's their baggage. A lot of people project. So, I hate that.
Yeah, yeah. There's this like almost internalized shame around like, oh, well, I'm not with someone, so like maybe there's something wrong with me, or I'm not with someone, so like I need to hurry up and do it so that I'm seen as acceptable. And that pressure is when if you go into dating or into a relationship with that sense of like almost, I guess, kind of like obligation around it, or like fear of what you're missing out by not having it, then that's going to also lead into some issues once you get into it because you're not really coming at it from a place of like, I want this for me. This is exactly what I need right now, for the kind of life that I want to live, not the kind of life that others want me to live. So something that I speak to a lot is always doing something, whatever you're going to do, whether it's a decision to change some part of you for your relationship, because, sometimes we have to do that. Sometimes we have to compromise a little bit. You always want to check in with yourself and make sure, is this something that I'm doing for me? Does this feel aligned with who I want to become? Because if there's a question about that, if there's a part of you that's like, you know what, actually, I'm doing it because I think I'm supposed to, that's going to come out eventually, and you're going to end up regretting that original decision. And so whenever you make any kind of decision to do something, always check in with yourself. If you have that sense, like ideally you have a relationship with yourself where you're aware of what kind of things you want and what direction you want to head in. And if not, it's never too late to start to develop that. So you can really hear that inner voice and say, okay, this is something that I need to do. This is something that I want to do. Let me make sure that my reasons are aligned with where I want to end up in my life.
Exactly. And that's why I have beef with the concept of compromise, because so often it's just this weaponized thing that tells you basically to just settle, meet halfway, or maybe even like just to sacrifice something of you to please the other person, especially as women. Like I've been raised like you need to like be a martyr for other people, you know, you need to do this for them, you need to be the perfect this, and you need to like host, and then you need to like suck it up and all of the stuff, especially for instance, like when you go travel, it's just like, yeah, it's compromise. So everybody's halfway happy is how I see it. Just like why? Like why, you know, like you said, you need to look at your own needs in the current, like when you look at, oh my gosh, my mind just like all over the place right now. But you know, when somebody expresses their needs, then you're like, I want to meet them, but you need to also look at yourself. Would it be at the expense of mine, or can I just, you know, accommodate that? You know, that's the thing. If you can work with it in a way that is both working for you, not just flat out like that's how I want things, do it. And then you just do it, and then you realize, oh my gosh, this doesn't work for me. This makes me feel uncomfortable or used or overlooked or whatever. So like both parties, it's a lot of work for sure. Like I'm sure like relationships are a lot of work, but it becomes more easy and also peaceful to just address these things when you realize that neither person has to be super triggered about it. It can come from a place of love and compassion. And if they respect you enough, or if they like feel good enough that you can just say things that are like annoying you, knowing that they actually have the trust in you to say that, because so many people I often have been scared to voice my needs for fear of them rejecting me or like taking it personally. So like when there's someone who's actually open to that, I actually feel grateful. Like you can come to me, you can state your boundaries, and then I can also learn how to set boundaries. Like it's a gift of that sort.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. And it's like you want to make sure that the person that you're with is open to you, right? And that's not something that we can control necessarily. That's something that is just something that we are on the lookout for. And so that goes into like picking the partners and picking the kind of people that we want in our lives. And if we want to make sure that the kind of people that we're picking are quality people, we have to be quality people. We have to be willing to be authentic and brave and hear those rejections and not make it mean anything about us, and not make it mean that we're not whole, worthy, and lovable, but just like, you know what? Not everybody's going to like me. Not everybody's going to have the same values as me. And that doesn't mean anything about me. That means something about their decisions and their thoughts and feelings. But when we start off this journey with a low self-esteem, or when we start off this journey thinking that there's something inherently wrong with us, we will see that reflected in the interactions that are given to us by others. So we have this belief in us, like, okay, I'm not worthy of love. Let's say that's one of your core beliefs. And you go into interactions and then somebody rejects you and you're like, that validates that internal belief that I'm not worthy of love. And so you start seeing it. And then if you believe that about yourself and you're like, well, this is just a fact, you might date that person. You might continue in the relationship with that, and then just engage in behaviors that only encourage that belief. And so a lot of what coaching is, a lot of what self-reflection, journaling, meditation is really looking inward and say, what are the beliefs that I hold about myself? What is my relationship with myself like? And how can I really mend that relationship so that I love myself, I support myself, I know that I'm amazing and worthy and lovable, and then I can approach the world with that energy. And that's exactly the energy that I'm going to receive back. And when I made that change, I remember like everything was different, because all of a sudden I felt good. I felt whole, and I didn't need another person to complete me. I didn't need like validation externally. And that was amazing for me. And I feel that on a daily, and I just want to be able to give that to other people as well, because when they start off relationships, or even if they're in a relationship or already dating, when they make that shift, like they see the external, the universe kind of reflect that back to them. And it's almost like a gift that we give ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you need to be both selfish and not selfish in a relationship. Like selfish in a way that you need to look at your own needs. You need to make sure that you meet them, and not selfish in a way that you just want the other person to do it for you and just expect them to know. You know, like there's healthy conversation. And sure, there's emotional labor. You need to like be mindful of what needs to be done and stuff. But like you can't just go into a relationship expecting them to be suddenly your emotional support all the time. Like when you don't like yourself, then suddenly it's on them to like you, so you can prove to yourself that you're worthy of it. Like that's not how it works. You need to be able to see what you need to tell them so they can help you with your needs, but also like, and then they need to know so they can communicate it to you. So it needs to be like an equal conversation to be had instead of just what is usually expected that, you should know that I do these things. Sometimes, yes, if you've been long enough in a relationship, it's, there's things you already know that should be intrinsic that you shouldn't just constantly have to remind people of. But at the same time, you can also talk things through and not just constantly expect people to know everything you're doing all the time. When you're triggered, like, and you ask someone like, what did I do? Let's talk about it. No, I'm not upset. Like, I'm not upset. And then they're clearly upset and they're not opening up. They're just, building walls. There's this time and space for like retracting yourself from the situation to like work with your feelings, but there's also a way to use that against another person, like, in retaliation maybe. And that's a like trauma response maybe in some cases. And I often catch myself with that, like silent treatment, such an easy, nice weapon to use, but it's really not good. So
Yeah, stonewalling. That's a classic.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's easy because it's like a wall goes up and like I'm impenetrable. Now you cannot hurt me. It's like it's the same way anger works. Oftentimes we put it up because we're vulnerable and it protects us from those hurt feelings. And so it's really knowing what are your defense mechanisms and understanding them. I know like I have my set that I'm still working with. And then part of what you were saying about like knowing what you want and making sure that you're asking for it, like that's a lot of the work I do as well. It's like sometimes we don't know what we want, and yet we expect our partner to know what we want, but we haven't asked them, and we haven't voiced it. That is so common, and it's crazy how like okay, if we stop and like actually look at what you want. And then really examine it and say, like, do you want this? And if the answer is yes, it's like, okay, do you want this from your partner? Or can you get it from your friend? Can you get it from yourself? Like, is there a way for you to be fulfilled in your life outside of your relationship? Now, if this is something that's crucial to you and it's like, no, I need this from my partner, okay, let's figure out a way to try to get it. How do we communicate the importance of this need? How do we say it in a way where it doesn't feel like demanding or resentful? We work around the way that we approach your needs. We don't ever like ignore them or push them away, but we always make sure that they are actually things that you want. Because sometimes they actually aren't things that we want. We just think that we want them. And sometimes there are things that like one of the things that I work with people sometimes around is like birthdays. And like sometimes it's okay to remind people that it's your birthday. And this idea that like they should remember, and if they don't, that means something about you or about their relationship to you. Like those are all thought patterns that we really dissect and question. It's like, is this really serving you to think that they hate you because they didn't remember your birthday? Or is it maybe like they just forgot and next year you can remind them a day or two ahead of time, right? And really embracing your life from like the responsibility of it instead of like defaulting to whatever life throws at you.
No, absolutely. I also have that thing with birthdays. I'm very weird about it. It's like, yeah, I'm like a summer kid. Like nobody was home during school at that time, so I was like alone, friends on my birthday. So like, still weird about it. People keep forgetting it exists, and I know I forget people's birthdays if I don't see it in my calendar on that day. My brain will just sometimes completely tap out. Uh, Normally, it has nothing to do with the actual person. So like, yeah, there's all of these stories we tell ourselves and then we need to look at, is this true? Or can we actually ask the person? Like, cause sometimes you just build up yourself this story and then you can just ask them like, hey, did you do it on purpose that you just left the chat midway? Or is it on purpose that you forgot my birthday? Like, did you know it's my birthday? And like you can ask people. Yes, sometimes they make up an excuse. Sometimes you can tell, but yeah, sometimes people will actually surprise you with their actual explanation for things, and you jump to conclusions on it.
Yeah. And that goes back to those like rooted beliefs. So if you have an assumption about your partner or your friend or what have you, that they're in a way selfish or they don't really mean well. And this is something that you have probably a lot of evidence for if you believe it. Because it's like, I remember that time that they did that thing, they forgot that thing. And we have all of this evidence that we accumulate. And then the conclusion is they are selfish. So then we start to see every interaction, or at least some of the interactions, as a reflection of that belief. And we don't give them the benefit of the doubt of like, maybe that day they were just really swamped, or maybe, something came up for them or whatever, because we have this lens that we're seeing them through of they're selfish. And so, like, allowing people to be human and to give them that benefit of the doubt and say, okay, let's brain, maybe they are selfish. That's a possibility. What else is possible? What other things can I consider that I haven't even allowed myself to go to because I'm so stuck on this one possibility, right? And just taking that pause to break that thought pattern and to go, what else is possible? Let me consider it for a moment, can change relationships so much. Because then if we actually allow like our rational brain to like pipe into the conversation, it's like, oh, you know what? Actually, this is probably more likely. And then we can take action from a different assumption, and that changes our entire state. We might show up a little warmer, a little kinder, and then what we get back in return is going to change because we're warmer and kinder. And that entire interaction will be different just because we stop to question that initial belief.
Exactly. And I think it can also sometimes be like, like it might be tricky, especially when you're coming with like your confirmation bias. But sometimes those things, when you actually then go calm yourself down a little bit, or maybe ask someone else, for a friend from a different perspective, like, do you think this is how they took it? And you just ultimately reach out to them and ask them, what did you mean by that? Or like, did you mean this or that? And then they can come back at it. And then if they are very weird about it, because some people don't have the nerve or the mindfulness to actually hold the space for you, and then they like come out their own stories, and both sides feel super misunderstood. If you just realize that that happens a lot, then maybe it's just not a match at all. Like, you're basically not able to work on this together, and then you're just drifting apart. And sometimes that can be like a good litmus test for how this relationship goes, like even platonic. I mean, it can also be used as an excuse to be like, yep, see, this is not worth it, whatever. But then you already anyway tap out in a way. But sometimes it just also opens up ways for healing. You're like, they're actually willing to explain it to you, to make you feel good about it. They're like, no, 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 it's okay. Thank you for telling me this. I didn't know my words landed that way. I'll consider that in the future. I do this, like, what would help you get clearer? Should I do a voice message next time? Whatever, like, it can still, like, it can help you grow, or it can help you grow apart. But I think it just still helps you get somewhere.
Definitely. And there is such thing as like compatibility. Like sometimes we are just not at the same place right now, or maybe, we grew apart. And there are ways to know that, because you start to feel like you're sacrificing too much of yourself, and you start to feel almost like alien to yourself, or like you're not really who you want to be in the relationship, or maybe like you're working too hard. Sometimes that could be a sign, because relationships, they do take work, but they shouldn't be exhausting, right? There should be some level of joy and ease, and there should be some level of excitement to them. And so if you feel yourself like drained by a person, if you feel yourself like compromising way too much or too often for the person, or if you feel yourself like holding on to something that like it feels like you have like an iron grip. I know that feeling really well. It's like I'm holding on to it, and it's like it doesn't really want to be held on to, but God, am I going to hold on anyway? Like, you kind of know already. And so it's really about going back and trusting that, like, okay, I've gotten to the point, I've given this relationship a lot, maybe all I have. And then I'm really questioning, okay, is it time to let go? And if I am letting go of this relationship, am I doing it for reasons that I'm really happy with, right? Because like you said, we could be doing it for a reason like, I just don't want to deal with this, and it's just easier for me to stop talking to them. That's a perfectly fine reason, but you have to be okay with that, because later you might be like, oh, I wish I had given that relationship a little bit more work. So you want to take that into consideration too, not just how you're feeling now, but how are you going to be feeling in the future when you don't have them? Are you going to wish that you had given it more chances? So you always want to come back and just ask yourself, okay, am I good with this reason? And if I am, then go for it and don't question it after that.
Yeah, no, that's a tricky part, because sometimes, especially in hindsight, and when there's a lot of time between, it's easy to start forgetting things, and then romanticize things, or like, it wasn't that bad. I don't remember it being that bad. Like, maybe I overreacted, and then you're discrediting your own gut feeling, which might have been exactly the reason why you left. Sometimes it's not logical. Sometimes you can do list of pros and cons, and then some outside people will like still push you for this relationship because it kind of makes sense in some capacity. But if you already have that feeling, if you already looking for excuses to leave, then that usually should be some indicator that you need to look inwards and have a conversation with yourself. And it doesn't even have to mean, like you said, that the person is not good or mistreats you, or maybe you just grew apart, and that is a part of life, that you sometimes just grow apart or you develop at different stages and it's no longer compatible, and that kind of feels sad and hard to come to terms with on your own, especially when other people are feeling kind of involved in this relationship as well. So it is tricky. So like, yeah, you have to be really mindful of yourself and like really also sit down with yourself and maybe write it down so you can look back at it, like make a video recording for yourself to look before next time you want to like contact your ex and think it's not that bad. And you looked at the video like, yeah, no, thank you old me for reminding me of this right now. Whatever works for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we do have that kind of memory where it's like, okay, when we're in the relationship and it's not going the way we want it to, all we can see is how awful it is. All we can see is how other people's relationship are better. And then we leave the relationship and then all we can remember is the good times. And all we can remember is how happy they made us and how their eyes sparkle or whatever. And it's really about, remember, like there's a whole picture to this. There's not just what I'm allowing myself to see, but there is the 50-50 of life, which means it will be 50% positive and 50% negative, and we cannot really escape that. And so making sure that we're stopping and looking at the whole picture. And it's so difficult when we're trapped in it, when we're in the pit, especially if it's negative emotion. It's almost like it's inescapable. There's just, our brain doesn't allow us to see anything but. And so that's why it's really good to like talk to a friend or have a coach or just write it down and allow yourself to see the whole picture.
Yeah, like a neutral third party. Yeah.
Exactly. And say, okay, what else? Or it just, you can even be that for yourself and really try to like make yourself see, okay, what am I not seeing? What is the whole picture here? And a really good way to do that is asking yourself questions and really like interrogating yourself and going to the root of things. And when you are able to do that, you make smarter decisions because you're not acting from this emotional space. You're allowing yourself to access your rational mind.
Yeah. And it's good if you're like, oh, it's like externalize it. That it helps me when I look at like concrete evidence. Like, when you ask yourself the question, just full on feel into your body where like, do I contract or do I like expand? Do I feel like after hanging out with them, do I feel like good or do I feel like exhausted? Like there's all of these little telltale signs that your body can give you if your mind is already like messing with you and you don't see clearly. Sometimes it's just like journaling or meditating or talking to an old lady on the bench on the street, like whatever, like like what works for you. And like maybe don't go to the friend who is already biased against or for the relationship, like find somebody who can be a soundboard, ask for permission of course, but or like in a coach, right? So can suss it out in a more neutral way. It doesn't have to be like clinically detached, but it should be more of a bigger picture, like you said, because there's so many aspects. And sometimes you can get lost in all of these aspects, but overall you just like, actually you're not feeling it anymore. Or like you really want to be in it and you're just looking at all of the little things. But the big question is like, do you want to be in this relationship right now in this moment? And has it been like that consistently? Yes or no? Right? Sometimes the answer is really simple. It just feels so difficult to stick to it and allow it to be a decision, Like that's usually my thing. Like I'm not very good with sticking to my decisions or feeling like that conviction.
Yeah. I think so it's this two-part. It's first trusting yourself to know that you want what you want. It has to be okay for you to just want to leave, and that's reason enough, right? It's not because they treat you badly. It's not because you're terribly unhappy. Sometimes the relationship is fine, and there's just a feeling that like, I just don't want to be in this, and that is okay. You don't need to justify to anybody else. You just have to like your reason, and if your reason is I just want to, that's perfectly acceptable. So then there's that aspect to it, and then also the bravery that it takes to do something bold, the bravery of what is unknown, and like taking a step out of this relationship or leaving a relationship means that I don't know what's happening in my life next, right? Before I knew I was going to wake up next to this person and this was going to happen and that, and now that's all gone, and that fear is serious and it's real, and it also is not a good reason to hold yourself back, because if you do everything in avoidance of fear, you will do nothing.
Right.
So
and it's not
that you're allowing yourself to embrace those big emotions because your life is worth the risk, the life you want to have at least.
Exactly. It's not fair to either party because like the other person then only gets like a version of yourself. And ultimately, in a good relationship, you want both parties to be happy. You want yourself to be happy. You want them to be happy. And so if they're like sacrificing something, just playing along, that also just hurts them because that also makes them feel like, oh, I'm not even worthy to like be with. It can backfire so much if they get that. And usually people can pick up on it, even if they're not very sensitive or empathetic. Like you still get that they're already tapping out, and either you both want to make it work or you just have to accept it, which sucks. But yeah, and then a lot of people will have opinions about it either way. So like that is another factor that people often get swayed by. What will other people think? Or they set me up. Like now they might feel bad about themselves, but like that's not a you thing.
Hmm. Yeah, and other people's opinions are theirs. I always say that like
Yeah,
that belongs to them, right? And that's their property, and it's they sometimes they want to share it with me, and I'm like, no, thank you. Like I appreciate that, but that's yours. You could keep it. And
right.
it the feeling of disappointing other people, that is it's almost like we have a responsibility to keep other people happy when we're so afraid of disappointing others or what other people are going to think. There's a belief maybe inherently that like, oh, it's my job to make sure that other people are okay. And if they're not okay, I'm doing something wrong. So then I have to live my life in a way that makes other people feel better about whatever. And that's, I think once we've done that for any amount of time, we recognize like that's no way to live. We cannot continue that way. It's just not sustainable because then we don't get to show up as who we are authentically. We don't get to live the kind of life that we want to live. And so it's like making peace with that, the fact that other people are going to have their opinions. And okay, sometimes it's disappointing to cause other people disappointment. That's okay. That's just an emotion. You can process that. You can have compassion and love for them. You can talk them through it and try to get them to understand if you really want to. Or you can just let them have their feelings and live your life the way you want to live it.
Exactly. I think that's sometimes you just have to accept the discomfort of your actions. So, but you have to be true to yourself, not in an asshole way. But ultimately, you have to be, your own biggest cheerleader. You have to have your back.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Because if you don't look out for you, like, other people aren't going to do it for you. Like, you have to be the one who stands up for what you want and that speaks up for you and takes care of you first and foremost. And as women, we're so often like kind of told or raised up to be the caretakers for others and to look out for others first. And I found that a lot of growing up is unlearning a lot of different things, unlearning the behavior that we were thought was so important, right? Unlearning that we have to be pretty all the time, and learning that we have to be proper, like you were saying earlier. It's like those things don't actually benefit us most of the time. And we can choose to leave that behind because it doesn't serve us. And so creating an intentional life, creating a life that we want to live is about asking ourselves, getting back in touch with what we want for our lives, whether that's what kind of partner we want, what do we want to put up with, what do we want to ask for, who do we want to no longer have interactions with, what do we want to look like, right? It's all these different aspects of our lives that we get to decide once we recognize that the values that we were brought up with maybe weren't the best ones to continue to have.
Exactly. Just because it has been done doesn't mean it needs to go on.
Totally.
Yeah. No, this is also just at the core of it, it's liberating when you realize you can do you. And it actually doesn't necessarily cause pain and hurt and rejection, but it can also lead to you inspiring other people to follow themselves, especially if you have kids. You don't want to teach them to make themselves small and to accept relationship that doesn't serve them because they will learn from you and you will perpetuate the cycle, right? So like being mindful up front and just like being just really yourself will also help other people like in that way because you're inspiring them. It's hard sometimes. You want to look at people and you can see how they're stuck and want to maybe save people, but you can't do that. But you can only be like a shining example, and then maybe they're coming to you for advice because they see something, or maybe they are inspired by you, or maybe they're not. You don't know. But at the end of the day, it's you that you have to be accountable for. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Can you say more about like this desire to, you were saying, with friends, so like I'm sorry, would bring them along. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's just like when you show up as yourself and you really just are authentic and unapologetically yourself and really act that out, and like then other people can see that too and realize, maybe self-reflect on, oh, maybe actually I really like setting that boundary with people, or maybe I haven't been as honest in that way. Like for me, when I see people having a really good relationship or even like having a healthy fight, an argument, and often I'm like triggered when people argue. I'm like, oh my God, like please don't break up. But like when I see people like actually emotionally, maturely working on this, like still liking each other, still holding space, like that inspires me and like shows me it's
Mhm.
possible. Because if I haven't seen it before, then it's just like this vapid concept of like, yeah, you should respect each other and you should accept your flaws, and like shouldn't be resentful. You should communicate. Like these are all nice concepts, but if you haven't really been in a space where that's been lived, because you just look for it again, the confirmation bias, you haven't like been open to seeing it because you just constantly, your brain is like attuned to different things and different vibes. Suddenly when you like see a good vibration, you suddenly see it, then you can see more of it, and then you can be attracted to it, and then you can try to practice it and like get familiar with it. And it's just really, yeah, finding that in yourself and then looking for it can have this positive trickle down effect. Instead of just being in your bubble, that everybody's affirming, yeah, we're miserable, like what, we gotta go through it, and you're constantly affirming that. You could be doing the opposite, like trying to look for other things that could affirm positive ways to change relationships with yourself or other people. Right. So you could like not intentionally, like you're not supposed to like set out and be like this shining example for everybody. Again, then that's not the point. You need to do it for yourself. But like even seeing that this freedom has such a positive effect potentially feels good. And then I don't know, maybe can help affirm this step to yourself when you get feedback like that, like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize this relationship was toxic, thank you for mirroring something. Like sometimes people will come up to you and say things like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize until you reacted weirdly when he said that to me, because I'm just so used to him like dismissing me in that way, and then you were like standing up for me. Nobody's done that before. Like you can help people that way because it's become so normal to you,
Mm.
to help them like themselves more. When you like yourself more, you can practice it on other people.
Yeah, yeah, I see that. Yeah, and it is difficult for us to not to understand what is possible when we don't have like a role model, like you were saying. Absolutely, yeah. And so being able to step out of that and consider like maybe it is possible, right? Let me go search on purpose for examples where it is possible and then it's done well. And then you yourself become that example. And part of my mission in this world is to show women that they don't have to settle and that they are much more in control than they think they are, that they have so much more influence over what they create. And I was never one to understand that early on, like growing up. I didn't have really that role model to show me like what a successful, loving relationship was. And so there was a part of me that's like, well, is that even a thing? Like, isn't that just for movies? Like, don't the rest of us just kind of settle? And like, those kind of things that we just don't really question until there's like you're in a relationship and there's a deep dissatisfaction in you. And then you start to think like, is this normal? Is this the way that this is supposed to be? Is there another way? And if you let that voice get louder and louder and you start to really sit in that question, then that's where you can start to find your answers, because that's when your brain is going to start to be like, let me consider that there is a possibility. So it definitely helps to have people in your circle that can be that for you. Absolutely. Because it's easier for your brain to see when there's an example of it. And so we want to first believe that is possible, know that is possible, and then seek out those examples that it is possible. And I think it's becoming more normalized. I think as time goes on, we're starting to settle less, I guess. It's like we're starting to want more and to not sacrifice as much and to take less BS. And I love being able to be part of this generation of women who are standing up for what they want and that aren't putting up. And because, unfortunately, the generations before us, they didn't really have a choice, right? They kind of had to stay in these marriages that were awful because they didn't have the financial freedom. They had the kids, all that stuff. And we are a new breed. And so we get to approach this differently. We get to tackle it from an entirely different perspective, having an entirely different set of resources. And we have to be able to take advantage of that. And so the old ways of looking at relationships no longer work. that old mentality. We have to come up with a new approach. And all of that comes back to like, let's show the world that it is possible to have thriving, successful relationships, even if your partner doesn't want to go to couples therapy, even if your partner doesn't want to change. You have so much that you can do on your part to make that relationship happen. And so,
Yeah,
give up and keep looking for those answers, because when you ask the right questions, you will find the right answers.
exactly. And especially when you are not in this environment and everybody keeps telling you to like, no, stay in it, like for a gazillion reasons, but your gut feeling gets louder and louder. And even if you can't even justify it logically, like, oh my God, they're not hitting me, they're not doing these things, like they're sometimes looking after the kids or like whatever, like you can find a million excuses. But if you don't feel happy, like you said, can just be that simple, then you have to follow your own inner compass, regardless of what people will tell you. They might be shocked and they might try to push you back, but that's like a them thing, right? It's their business. And you want to be just like coming from a place of self-love and love towards the other person because you did share relationship together. But if you feel like you have to break up, it's just not serving you, then it's not serving them either. Then you're both of you just cruising about and just being unfulfilled. And to some extent, because there would be a person that would love them really as they deserve, maybe as you loved them in the past, but you can't anymore. And then likewise, there's another person for you out there where it's you that really fulfills that need and makes you happy in the way that you deserve, because you both deserve it. Right. And so like if you can't give that to each other, like why should you just waste time? You don't need companionship necessarily only in romantic relationships. There's so many other places and people you can hang out with, and there could be like a lot of different friends who have different ways to help you with your needs. You shouldn't always put it on one person. And a lot of people think that a relationship, when they suddenly like submerge into a relationship and then they're nowhere to be seen in the friendship group until they break up and then they resurface. I think that is really dangerous and that needs to be looked at. Like you should, yes, spend a lot of time with your partner, but you're also an individual outside of a relationship. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. That's a lot of the work I do is like, okay, what is your life like outside of this relationship? How can we, especially when it comes down to like, I don't feel like my needs are being met. It's like, okay, it's possible that you're putting too much of your needs on this relationship. When a relationship has too much weight on it, it cannot breathe, right? We have to relieve some of the pressure from the relationship and allow it to breathe, give it air, and then come back to it like cleanly and like really intentionally, like, this is what I want from my partner. But I have so much I can give myself. I have so many resources available to me. Maybe I don't have a friend group. Maybe I'm out of touch with my friend group. And I have to question why I allowed myself to get to that place, forgive myself for that, and then allow myself to go back to it and to see life as more than just my relationship. It's also my work. It's also like my goals. It's also my self-care. It's my friendship. It's my family. It's all the things. And I think especially when we're young, we get lost in those intense emotions of love because we've never had that kind of like experience. It does take us away. It is a drug to our physiology. And we have to recognize that. And once that wears off and once we're like, okay, like we kind of look around, it's like, what have I done with my life? Then we can start doing the work of rebuilding it and making sure that you are living a full life, 100% from every area. Like, are you healthy? Are you eating well, right? Are you spending time alone? All of those little things eventually come to, are you living a fulfilling life? And then you might like think, oh, it's my relationship that's not fulfilling. But in actuality, it's that you're not giving yourself more than just your relationship to allow yourself to be fulfilled.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it also comes in with how you are clear on yourself, on your needs and your expectations, on what you tolerate and what you really don't. Because I read this article once, like I keep saying that, but like I can't even quote it. But they tested people before they met someone in like a date, like what their absolutely no goes are, like what would you accept or tolerate in a relationship, and then rate it at some point. And then they were really set on like, yeah, I definitely don't want anybody who like smokes or who has a cat or like whatever. And then they met somebody and their hormones went wild and they wanted to date them. And then I asked them again, like, what are these criteria? How would you rate them? And it went down depending on how much they liked them, they were attracted to them. And that's like the danger of like the honeymoon phase when you're just just accept everything because you just like them so much. And then your brain tricks you into like tolerating more than you are. So like it needs to be really specific on like, would you actually like them in the long run? Like, I mean, it's fine if you have like a short fling, whatever, like that's different. But if you actually want to build a relationship with someone and then suddenly come out of the honeymoon phase, you're like, damn, I don't like them at all. Like you need to be honest with yourself what you actually want from that person in that way. And it's hard to discern that when you were like flooded with the hormones and like in that phase, knowing at your needs. And sometimes your needs are too, like what you, no, your needs aren't, but like sometimes what you think you want isn't necessarily what you actually care for, like you said. So we're coming full circle. So like, it's good to also use that to reevaluate what actually matters to you, what you want to tolerate, or is that just something you thought you kind of wanted or tolerated, and then actually it's not a big deal, or it's not maybe a big deal with that person in general, not just because of the honeymoon phase. Like it's a lot of work. It's so complex.
And sometimes we have to fail to figure out what works for us. Like sometimes we have to be in not so great relationships and be that, head over heels in love and make all of the mistakes so that we come out of it. We're like, okay, what can I learn from it? What did I take away from this relationship so that I don't repeat this pattern? What really worked in this relationship so that I can take it with me? Like all of that is so super important for us if we take the time to really stop and analyze it. Because when we leave a relationship, if we are filled with shame and embarrassment and like regret, we don't allow ourselves to really look back on it and to examine it and say like, what actually went well. We were kind of like, I never want to think about it again. Let me just push it away and forget it. And then accidentally, we might repeat the same patterns because we didn't allow ourselves to really reflect on what happened and really like know ourselves deeper by the decisions that we decided to make because we did them for a reason, right? Like I remember in my first relationship, I was so desperate for acceptance that I put up with so much because I'm like, well, this person like accepts me and tolerates me and loves these weird things about me. And I've never had that. And so I'm going to pretend that I don't see all of these red flags because I'm desperate for this acceptance, this love. And I needed that. And that was okay for that time. But then I left and I'm like, oh, what I really needed was that love to come from me and that love to be first felt within me so that I wasn't out there searching for somebody else to give it to me. And it was so crucial that I learned that I wouldn't, change that relationship in any capacity because now I have that knowledge and now I have that self-love. And then I could enter a relationship that was like the one that was actually healthy for me. And so make sure that if you do find yourself doing something that you're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, don't feel shame and embarrassment. I mean, if that comes up for you, allow it, of course, be with it, breathe into it. That's normal. But it's also a perfect opportunity for you to examine and learn about yourself and know yourself deeper because we do these things for a reason and get really curious about what those reasons might be.
Exactly. And again, mindfulness comes in. Because sometimes you could have worked on it in the moment, but sometimes you didn't have the capacity or needed the distance or it just wasn't working yet. It's always, tricky because sometimes you learn something from a relationship and then you feel so much shame around it. Then you leave and then do better in the next relationship. Like that can also happen, which isn't entirely fair. But like, that's why you have to be mindful, like what's working in the moment, what's working now, what can you address, what can you change, or what can you change in yourself moving forward. Maybe it's not working in that way when there's no reciprocity on that side. Again, like it's all super complex. So having an outside voice helps you demuddle everything.
Yeah, an outside voice that's neutral, an outside voice that has the tools to help you and guide you through all this can be like a life changer. And I think so much of why I wanted to start this business was because I noticed that I could have done this so much better. If I had the tools, I could have shortcutted it. I could have done it faster. I could have spared myself so much suffering. And so now I'm like, how can I help other women spare them from that suffering? Right? How can I put these tools in their hands and say, you know what, I had to go through it so that you don't have to. And let me get ahead of you and teach you from my experience and with the, just the general universal truths that are we need to love ourselves deeply so that we can really have those healthy, thriving relationships that we want.
Exactly. And that's where people should start. Just look at your relationship to self. There's so many ways to go about it. So thank you so much for doing that. And is there anything we haven't covered so far, because we've went quite deep on all of the topics, but is there something that you want to tell people that we haven't yet? Like the kernel of things other than self-love?
Yes, of course. And it always goes back to that, of course. But I think something that I want to leave people with is also like relationships require a mentality that says that they are important, that they are a priority. And it's hard because we can have so many different priorities at the same time. So we have ourselves, our main priority, we have maybe a business or a career, and then we have our relationship. And so it's like, it's so easy for a relationship to kind of fall into the back burner or kind of be like second to the rest of the things because it's like, well, it'll always be there for it. And then it'll always be there for us. And then we kind of take it for granted a little bit. And so what I want to say is like, a quote that I hold on to dearly is that the quality of our relationship dictates the quality of our lives. And when we have thriving, successful relationships, we can show up in the world so much bolder because we have a place, a home to come back to. We have support. We have a soundboard. And so never underestimate investing in your relationship, time, energy, attention. It will always come back to you and benefit you and fill your cup. And think of it as a form of self-care. When your relationships are taken care of, you are taken care of. You're putting money in the bank of trust and love, commitment and intimacy. And so always make sure that you're making time for those important relationships, that you're making time for yourself to reflect, because those relationships are going to enhance you if you're tackling them from a place of wanting to grow and wanting more possibility for your life. So when we prioritize relationships, it can look a lot of different ways. It can literally look like making sure that you're texting your partner or having a weekly date night or a monthly check-in. There are so many strategies to do it, but first and foremost, make sure that you're making time to do it because it is worth it.
Oh my God, I love that. That's like the best point. You kept it to the last. I love it. It's so true. Like, 'cause sometimes people see a relationship as just an afterthought, like something nice to have, or you were like replaceable, and you don't want people to feel that way in a relationship with you, be it platonic or romantic. That's like the worst thing you can do to somebody else, right? It's just erodes that trust and that love. Yeah, but so like, yeah, invest in relationships is investing in yourself. Is so important. I love that you phrased it like that. Oh my gosh. And where can people find more of you? Like maybe work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am at marialevinecoaching.com. If you want to know more about me, I'm on Instagram at Maria Levine. That's MariaLavin. And yeah, let me know if you want somebody to really help you see your relationship clearly, whether you're not sure if you want to leave or you're just a little bit dissatisfied and want to know how to make it epic and romantic. I can definitely guide you and lead you through.
Thank you so much. All of the links will be down below in the show notes and description. So do check them out. Say hi to Maria. And yeah, thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an honor.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast episode. I hope you got a lot of good takeaways, as did I. It was almost like a therapy session. I had a lot of kind of throwbacks in my mind listening to Maria about different scenarios we talked about. Some of them were, me observing from other people. I'm not the most experienced in the relationship field myself, but I'm also very observant. I like to read a lot about psychology and about relationship books and self-help books, and just such a fascinating topic to me. So to listen to someone who is a coach and an expert in the field is so nice, validating, and just, like we discussed, having a third-party perspective on things also helps you personally in real life, because sometimes you can turn to friends about certain issues, and sometimes it really helps to get a different party in, like a coach or a therapist. So yeah, if that's of interest to you, like I said, the links are all down below, so you can follow Maria or I on the social media accounts and say hi, connect, or even, get in touch with services you might require. And as always, I will see you in the next episode on new topics surrounding how to be your bestest, most authentic and truest self in the most unapologetic but really kind of compassionate way possible. Until then, I see you and hear you back. I wish you a fabulous week. Bye.